The school where every child vanished. Dark chapters, buried truths of American history. In the autumn of 1838, a Gothic stone structure emerged from the Kentucky wilderness, its spires piercing the morning fog like accusing fingers. Magnolia Ridge Academy stood as a monument to educational excellence, promising the finest instruction for the children of wealthy families across 3 states. By spring, not a single child remained alive. 43 empty beds, 43 shallow graves, and a basement that still carries the scent of scientific horror nearly 2 centuries later. If you're new to our channel, now is the time to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We uncover the most disturbing chapters of American history, stories buried by time and shame, yet crucial to understanding our nation's darkest impulses. Leave a comment telling us what state you're listening from. These horrors happened closer to home than you might think. The Kentucky of 1838 was a land caught between wilderness and civilization. The state had achieved statehood less than 50 years earlier, and while cities like Louisville and Lexington boasted theatres, newspapers, and universities, much of the countryside remained frontier in both landscape and mentality. Dense forests covered rolling hills, broken only by scattered settlements and the occasional grand plantation house. Disease shaped life in these communities more profoundly than many modern Americans can comprehend. Yellow fever and cholera swept through river towns with terrifying regularity, killing indiscriminately and prompting those with means to flee urban areas during fever season. Between 1830 and 1840, Louisville alone recorded over 5,000 deaths from epidemic disease, many of them children whose developing immune systems proved no match for these virulent infections. This medical reality created a market for rural educational institutions, places where wealthy families could send their children to escape contagion while still receiving the instruction befitting their social standing. Boarding schools established in remote locations promised both health and education, a combination for which parents willingly paid premium fees. The fear of epidemic was so profound that parents faced an agonizing choice, wrote Dr. Thomas Harrington in his 1845 study of Kentucky's educational history. Keep children home in cities where death stalked the streets, or send them away to unknown caretakers in safer rural environments. For families of means, the decision was both obvious and heartbreaking. Into this environment of parental anxiety and desperate hope came Magnolia Ridge Academy, with promises that seemed heaven-sent. The school appeared suddenly in Kentucky society, announced through carefully placed advertisements in newspapers across Louisville, Lexington, Nashville, and as far away as St. Louis. The notices spoke of modern educational methods, healthful surroundings, and moral instruction of the highest caliber. Most importantly, they emphasized the school's location. Situated in elevated terrain far from miasmic influences, a direct appeal to parents' fear of disease. Construction had begun in spring of 1838, a remarkably rapid development that should have raised questions, but instead inspired confidence in the school's financial stability. Teams of workers, many brought in from outside the region, transformed a clearing 20 miles from the nearest town into a self-contained educational compound in less than 6 months. I've never seen builders work with such precision and haste, recalled Samuel Wilson, who supplied timber for the project. Most construction in these parts takes years, without delays for weather and funding. But Magnolia Ridge rose like it was conjured by magic, each building perfectly planned, each stone set with unusual care. The campus centered around the main academy building, a 3-story structure of locally quarried limestone with Gothic architectural elements, pointed arches, steep gables, narrow windows that gave it the appearance of a medieval monastery rather than a frontier school. Flanking the main building were 2 dormitory wings, one for boys and one for girls. connected by covered walkways to ensure students remain protected from inclement weather. Behind this impressive facade stood the practical buildings necessary for self-sufficient operation: kitchens, laundry facilities, storage buildings, staff quarters, and a small infirmary. The entire complex formed a perfect square around a central courtyard, creating a self-contained world that could function with minimal contact with surrounding communities. The design was ingenious, noted architectural historian Eleanor Montgomery in her 1978 analysis of the site. Every aspect served dual purposes. The imposing Gothic exterior impressed parents while creating natural soundproofing. The isolated location promised health benefits while ensuring privacy. The self-contained layout allowed complete control of all who entered or left. In retrospect, it was designed less like a school and more like a laboratory. The man who presented himself as headmaster Cornelius Ashford first appeared in Kentucky society in the early 1838, though investigations would later fail to trace his movements before this time. Standing 6 feet tall, with angular features, penetrating grey eyes, and prematurely silver hair, despite his apparent age of 45, he cut an imposing figure in his customary black suit and starched white collar. His speech combined the refinement of East Coast education with carefully deployed classical references that impressed provincial parents while subtly intimidating them. Mr. Ashford carried himself with such authority that questioning him felt almost sacrilegious, wrote Elizabeth Thornton, who enrolled her son, James, at Magnolia Ridge. When he spoke of educational philosophy, referencing European methods and scientific approaches, I found myself nodding in agreement, though I scarcely understood the technical terminology he employed. Ashford's credentials appeared impeccable: Harvard education, teaching positions at respected New England academies, published articles on educational theory, and letters of recommendation from Boston's most distinguished families. He spoke of his calling to bring progressive education to the developing frontier, describing his methods as a synthesis of classical learning and modern scientific understanding. The child's mind is not merely a vessel to be filled, he was fond of telling parents during introductory meetings, but a specimen to be studied, measured, and developed according to its innate capacities. The curious word choice, specimen, rather than the more customary instrument or garden and educational metaphors of the era, passed unremarked at the time. Only in retrospect would witnesses recall the clinical detachment in his voice when discussing his students. Dr. Ephraim Cole, the school's physician and assistant headmaster, presented a striking contrast to Ashford's commanding presence. Where Ashford impressed through presence, Cole disarmed through apparent gentleness. Short and slight with thinning hair despite his apparent youth of 35, Cole spoke softly and smiled often, though several parents noted his smile never reached his pale blue eyes. There was something unusual in how Dr. Cole observed the children during enrollment, recalled Thomas Hargrove after the disappearances. He asked them to walk across the room, to reach for objects, to recite simple phrases, all while making notes in a small leather book. When I inquired about this assessment, he explained it was to establish baseline health measurements, but his interests seemed more calculated than caring. Cole's medical credentials came from Philadelphia's Jefferson Medical College, then among the most prestigious medical institutions in America. He spoke passionately about advances in medicine and the importance of maintaining student health through scientific approaches rather than folk remedies. His infirmary, which parents were shown during initial tours, contained the most modern equipment available: microscopes, surgical instruments, pharmaceutical compounds imported from Europe. The medical facilities exceed what is available in most frontier towns, wrote Dr. James Hammond, a Lexington physician who visited the academy during its opening month. I was particularly impressed by Dr. Cole's extensive collection of anatomical texts and his apparent familiarity with the latest European research. Few physicians outside major cities maintain such resources. What Hammond and others couldn't know was that Cole's interest in anatomy went far beyond conventional medical practice. His private library, discovered months later, contained rare texts on human dissection, experimental surgery, and physiological research that pushed the boundaries of both science and ethics, even by 19th century standards. The teaching staff consisted of 5 additional instructors, each responsible for specific subjects: Miss Eliza Winters, literature and French; Mr. Robert Blackwood, mathematics and natural philosophy; Mr. James Peterson, Latin and Greek; Mrs. Margaret Sullivan, domestic arts and music; and Mr. Thomas Hayes, physical instruction and basic sciences. Unlike Ashford and Cole, who lived in private quarters attached to the main building, these teachers occupied Spartan rooms in the East Wing, separated from the students' dormitories but accessible for night supervision. Local workers completed the school's personnel: 2 cooks, 3 maids, a groundskeeper, and 2 handymen. These individuals, all from nearby farms and small settlements, departed each evening for their homes, their contact with students limited and always supervised by Ashford or Cole. Later investigations would reveal that several of these workers had expressed concerns about conditions at the school, only to be dismissed with threats of legal action for breaching the strict confidentiality agreements they had signed upon employment. Magnolia Ridge Academy opened its doors on September 4th, 1838, welcoming 43 students ranging in age from 8 to 16 years. The children came primarily from wealthy families in Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and Missouri: merchants, bankers, plantation owners, judges, and physicians who could afford the substantial tuition of $300 per term, equivalent to nearly $10,000 in modern currency. The enrollment process itself offered the first subtle indication of the school's unusual priorities. While academic assessment was cursory, physical examination was extensive. Dr. Cole personally examined each child, recording detailed notes about height, weight, reflexes, pain response, family medical history, and what he termed constitutional qualities. Parents interpreted this thoroughness as evidence of superior medical care. In reality, Cole was cataloguing subjects for future experiments based on physical characteristics. The daily routine at Magnolia Ridge followed a rigorous schedule designed by headmaster Ashford himself. Students rose at 5:30 a.m. for morning prayers, followed by cold baths meant to strengthen constitution and character. Breakfast consisted of porridge and milk, consumed in silence while an older student read from classical texts. Classes began promptly at 7 a.m. and continued until 6 p.m., with a brief break for a simple lunch of bread and cheese. The schedule leaves no room for idleness or vice, Ashford wrote in promotional materials sent to prospective parents. Children thrive under discipline, and our methods ensure both intellectual development and moral fortitude. This regimentation extended to every aspect of student life. Movement between buildings occurred in formation, with students walking in precise lines grouped by age and height. Communication was strictly regulated. Speaking was prohibited during meals, transitions between activities, and after 8 p.m. when students retired to dormitories. Letters home were written during designated periods on Sunday afternoons, with Ashford reviewing all correspondence before sealing the envelopes. Catherine Hardin, daughter of Lexington Judge William Hardin, left the most complete record of student life during those early weeks. At 13, Catherine was already an accomplished writer, whose journal entries revealed both excitement and apprehension about her new environment. Through her hidden writings, we glimpse the early days of Magnolia Ridge before events took their terrible turn. "The stone walls are so thick that silence seems to have substance here," she wrote in late September. "We girls share a dormitory with the 20 beds arranged in perfect rows. Speaking after lights out brings immediate punishment, standing in the corridor for hours holding books in outstretched arms. 2 girls were punished last night. Their sobbing echoed strangely through the halls." Catherine described classrooms with high ceilings and narrow windows that admitted minimal light, forcing students to strain their eyes in perpetual twilight. The furniture was handcrafted but uncomfortable, designed to prevent slouching or relaxation. Students sat rigidly for hours, hands folded on desktops, reciting lessons in unison, or working silently on individual assignments. Mr. Ashford observes our classes frequently, Catherine noted in early October. He stands absolutely still in the doorway, watching without expression. Sometimes he makes notes in a small book. The teachers grow nervous when he appears, becoming stricter, assigning additional work. Yesterday, Miss Winters made Eleanor recite her Latin declensions 7 times because she stumbled once under Mr. Ashford's gaze. Most disturbing were Catherine's descriptions of the weekly medical examinations. Every Sunday afternoon, while local children attended church with their families, the students of Magnolia Ridge filed into Dr. Cole's infirmary for what he termed preventative assessment. Initially, these examinations followed standard medical practices of the era, checking pulses, examining throats, measuring weight and height. Dr. Cole records everything in his ledger, Catherine wrote. He seems particularly interested in which students recover quickly from minor illnesses and which struggle. He asks strange questions about our families, whether our parents are cousins, if siblings died in infancy, how long our grandparents lived. The questions make many girls uncomfortable. By November, these routine examinations had evolved into something more troubling. Catherine's final journal entries, discovered months later, describe a significant shift in Cole's methods. Dr. Cole has begun separating us into groups he calls constitutions. The stronger students receive additional food and outdoor privileges. Those he deems weaker face restricted diets and additional medical treatments. William Bedford collapsed during class yesterday after 3 days on doctor. Cole's strengthening regimen of limited food and some bitter medicine. Dr. Cole seemed more interested than concerned, making notes while William shook with fever on the infirmary bed. The last dated entry in Catherine's journal, November 18th, contains a single disturbing line. Something is happening to the children who go to the special treatments in the basement. They return changed, quieter, their eyes vacant. Elizabeth hasn't spoken a word since her treatment 3 days ago. This journal, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the girls' dormitory, would later provide crucial evidence of the Academy's transformation from educational institution to something far more sinister. The first subtle signs of something amiss began to appear in late October, though no single incident raised sufficient alarm to overcome the school's carefully cultivated reputation. Parents received weekly letters during the first month, then bi-weekly correspondence thereafter. These letters, allegedly written by their children, but actually composed by Ashford and merely signed by students under supervision, followed a consistent formula. Praise for the school's methods, assurances about health and happiness, and generic details about recent lessons. By November, some parents noted that their children's letters had become shorter and less personal, with handwriting that sometimes appeared shaky or different from previous correspondence. When several families wrote expressing concern, Ashford responded with detailed explanations about the rigors of academic schedules limiting letter writing time, and reassurances that holiday visits would soon allow parents to see their children's progress firsthand. Local suppliers had more frequent contact with Magnolia Ridge, and their observations would later provide crucial evidence of the school's transformation. Benjamin Howard, who delivered groceries twice weekly from Millfield, the nearest town, noticed a gradual change in the school's orders beginning in late November. At first, it was just normal supplies: flour, potatoes, coffee, the usual goods for feeding 40-plus children, Howard later testified. But come December, the orders changed. Less food overall, but more specialised items. Barrels of lime, unusual amounts of alcohol, chemical compounds I had to order from Louisville. Dr. Cole claimed they were for science demonstrations, but I'd delivered to schools before, and these weren't typical educational supplies. Most telling were the medical instruments Howard transported from Louisville in early January: surgical saws, specialised knives, restraint size for small limbs, and quantities of laudanum that exceeded any reasonable medical need for a small school. When Howard inquired about these unusual items, Dr. Cole explained that the school was establishing a more advanced scientific curriculum that included anatomical studies. He showed me a letter supposedly from a medical college praising their progressive approach, Howard recalled. Said they were using animal specimens for the older students' instruction, but something felt wrong about the whole business. I never saw animal carcasses being delivered, for one thing, and the students I glimpsed looked thin and frightened, not like children receiving quality education. Margaret Wilson, whose farm bordered the school property, reported increasingly unusual activities observed from her land. At first, the children would be outside at regular times, walking in formation or engaged in calisthenics, she testified. By December, outdoor activities had all but ceased. The few children I saw were always accompanied by teachers, moving quickly between buildings, looking pale and withdrawn, and there were strange noises at night. Not childish mischief, but something that sounded like machinery. Most concerning were reports of students who seemed to vanish from daily routines. Catherine Harden's journal mentioned several classmates who went for special treatments and either returned changed or disappeared entirely from classes. When other students inquired about absent peers, teachers provided vague explanations about transfers to advanced study groups or isolation due to illness. Eliza Winters, who taught literature at Magnolia Ridge, became increasingly concerned about these disappearances and the overall atmosphere at the school. After witnessing a disturbing interaction between Dr. Cole and a young student who had been selected for special studies, she attempted to investigate the basement facilities that students mentioned with growing fear. Miss Winters was caught examining the locked basement door by Mr. Ashford himself, recounted Robert Davies, one of the groundskeepers. The argument was heated, with her demanding to know what happened during these special studies, and him reminding her of contractual obligations. The next day she was gone. Ashford told the staff she'd received news of a family emergency, but she left all her belongings behind. I helped pack them myself. Winter's departure in mid-December should have raised alarms, but Ashford moved quickly to replace her with a new teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, who students described as severe and unresponsive to their concerns. Unlike other staff, Thompson had private quarters adjacent to Ashford's and was observed assisting Dr. Cole with his medical duties in the evening hours. Samuel Blackwood, whose son Thomas attended Magnolia Ridge, received a disturbing letter directly from Thomas in mid-December, smuggled out with a departing kitchen worker. The letter, written in a shaking hand on a scrap of paper, contained a desperate plea. Father, something terrible happens in the basement. Students chosen for special studies never return the same. Please come immediately. Some have disappeared entirely. I fear I will be next. Blackwood departed for the school the following day, but upon arrival was informed that Thomas was confined to the infirmary with scarlet fever and couldn't receive visitors due to quarantine precautions. Despite Blackwood's insistence, both Ashford and Cole refused access to the infirmary, producing documents signed by the county health officer declaring quarantine conditions. Mr. Ashford was exceedingly polite but absolutely firm, Blackwood later recalled. He showed me a quarantine order supposedly signed by Dr. Lawrence Williams, though I noted the signature, appeared remarkably similar to Ashford's own hand. When I demanded to see my son, regardless of quarantine, Dr. Cole appeared with a vial of what he claimed were cultures of the infectious agent, threatening to break it if I insisted on entering the dormitory wing. Reluctantly departing with assurances that Thomas would write once recovered, Blackwood returned to his Nashville home troubled by the encounter. The letter that arrived 2 weeks later contained none of the urgent concerns from the smuggled note. Instead, it detailed Thomas's recovery from fever and his progress in mathematics, closing with assurances of his well-being. The handwriting, though attempting to mimic a child's script, bore subtle similarities to Ashford's formal style that Blackwood recognised but couldn't conclusively prove were forgeries. By January 1839, Magnolia Ridge Academy had transformed completely from its initial presentation as a premier educational institution. The change was reflected in the physical state of the property itself. Curtains remained drawn across all windows even during daylight hours. Additional locks appeared on exterior doors. The once immaculate grounds grew neglected as outdoor activities ceased entirely. Most tellingly, a second structure emerged adjacent to the main building, a smokehouse ostensibly for meat preservation, but constructed with unusual features, including a stone floor, drainage channels, and ventilation system far more sophisticated than required for simple smoking. Inside, the transformation was even more profound. The classroom wing fell increasingly silent as fewer students attended regular lessons. Those who remained were described by staff as the primary group, students selected for their robust health and superior academic performance. This group, approximately 15 of the original 43 children, maintained some semblance of normal educational routine, while their classmates disappeared into what staff now openly called the research program. The basement of the main building, originally designed as simple storage space, underwent extensive renovation during December and January. Workers brought in from Louisville rather than local communities worked through the night, installing specialized equipment, drainage systems, and what one worker later described as tables with straps like you'd see in a hospital, only smaller. James Peterson, the Latin teacher who had initially embraced Magnolia Ridge's educational mission, became increasingly troubled by these changes. In early January, he confronted Ashford about students missing from his classes, only to be told that educational priorities had shifted toward practical sciences for many students. When Peterson persisted, asking specifically about Catherine Harden, who had been his most promising Latin student, Ashford's response chilled him. "Some minds are better suited to contribute to knowledge than to merely absorb it," Ashford reportedly told him. "Miss Harden is making valuable contributions to scientific understanding that will benefit countless future students. Your classics program, while charming, offers no comparable impact." Peterson began keeping his own records of student disappearances and observed activities, hiding his notes within the binding of his Latin texts. His documentation would later provide crucial timeline evidence for the investigation, particularly regarding the acceleration of disappearances in January, when students began vanishing at the rate of 2 or 3 per week. By late January, parents across 3 states had received letters explaining that the planned Christmas holiday had been cancelled due to an outbreak of scarlet fever at the school. Ashford's correspondence outlined quarantine procedures and assured families that all possible measures were being taken to ensure student health and continued education despite the unfortunate circumstances. "We understand your disappointment," the letters stated, "but must prioritize both your children's welfare and public health. Rest assured that special holiday activities will compensate for their inability to return home during this period. Dr. Cole has implemented the most advanced medical protocols, and we anticipate full recovery for all affected students by spring term." Most parents accepted this explanation without question. Disease outbreaks were common, quarantines a standard public health measure, and Magnolia Ridge's reputation for excellence predisposed families to trust Ashford's judgment. A few parents expressed concern or requested special arrangements to see their children despite the quarantine, but each was systematically discouraged through increasingly elaborate medical explanations of contagion risk. Robert Davis, the groundskeeper who had earlier witnessed Miss Winter's confrontation with Ashford, became increasingly troubled by activities he observed while maintaining the property. In early February, he noticed Dr. Cole and 2 assistants loading large wooden crates onto a wagon during pre-dawn hours, handling them with unusual care and covering them with tarpaulins despite the absence of rain. When Davies approached to offer assistance, he was harshly ordered away from the area and warned that interfering with medical shipments would result in immediate dismissal. Davies also reported hearing strange sounds from the basement at night, mechanical noises unlike anything associated with normal school operations, and occasionally what sounded like muffled crying. When he mentioned these concerns to Mrs. Thompson,
the new teacher who had replaced Miss Winters. She warned him that curiosity about medical matters could prove dangerous, and suggested he focus exclusively on exterior maintenance. Most disturbing was Davis's observation of the school's waste management. As groundskeeper, he was responsible for monitoring the refuse pit at the property's edge where kitchen waste and other discarded materials were burned or buried. In late January, he discovered blood-stained linens and bandages among the waste, along with small personal items belonging to students. A hair ribbon he recognized as Catherine Harden's, a carved wooden soldier that Thomas Blackwood had carried since enrollment. Davies, increasingly convinced that something sinister was occurring, began documenting his observations in a journal similar to Peterson's hidden record. He also attempted to make contact with several parents, sending anonymous notes warning of troubling conditions at the school. These warnings, unfortunately, were either dismissed as pranks or reported directly to Ashford, who increased security around the property and restricted staff movements. Judge William Harden of Lexington had grown increasingly concerned as February approached with no direct communication from his daughter Catherine. The forged letters had stopped mentioning specific details about her studies, focusing instead on generic reassurances about recovered health and academic progress. The final letter Harden received contained a critical mistake, referring to Catherine's excellent progress in Greek translation, when Catherine had specifically been exempted from Greek studies due to her focus on French and German. This error confirmed Harden's suspicions that the letters were not from his daughter. He began contacting other parents, discovering similar concerns and inconsistencies. Thomas Blackwood shared his son's smuggled note and his troubling experience when attempting to visit. Elizabeth Thornton reported that her son's recent letters contained phrases and vocabulary he had never used before. James Wilson revealed that after multiple attempts to visit his daughter despite quarantine restrictions, he had been threatened with legal action for endangering public health. Within days, Harden had organised a delegation of 7 families determined to investigate conditions at Magnolia Ridge, regardless of quarantine restrictions. As a judge with significant legal authority and connections throughout Kentucky, Harden obtained an official inspection warrant from the governor himself, bypassing local officials who might have been influenced by Magnolia Ridge's economic importance to the region. The delegation arrived at Magnolia Ridge on February 14, 1839, travelling through snowfall that had deterred less determined visitors. What they discovered would shatter their lives and haunt Kentucky for generations. The school appeared abandoned at first glance. No smoke from chimneys despite the bitter cold. No footprints in the fresh snow. No response to repeated knocking at the main entrance. The front door stood unlocked, opening into an entrance hall that bore signs of hasty departure. Administrative ledgers open on desks. Half-finished cups of coffee. A clock stopped at 3:17. The silence was oppressive, Judge Harden wrote in his subsequent account. We called out repeatedly for Ashford, for the teachers, for our children. Only echoes answered. Room by room, we searched that terrible place, our dread mounting with each empty classroom and dormitory. The classrooms contained evidence of recent use, lessons still chalked on blackboards, student copybooks open to half-completed assignments, personal items neatly arranged in desks. The dormitories presented a more disturbing scene. Each bed was meticulously made with military precision, but personal belongings had been removed, leaving identical empty spaces where 43 children should have left evidence of individual existence. In Ashford's office, the delegation discovered the first concrete evidence of deception. A cabinet contained stacks of blank stationery with different children's names pre-signed at the bottom, templates for the forged letters sent to families over the preceding months. A ledger revealed careful tracking of each family's tuition payments alongside notes about their social connections and tendency to ask questions about their children's welfare. It was Caleb Wilson, a former military physician among the parents, who first noticed the uneven flagstone in the main hall that concealed the entrance to the lower level. "This doesn't match the original construction," he observed, running his fingers along the seam. "This stone has been cut and reset recently." The basement of Magnolia Ridge Academy revealed horrors beyond what any parent had imagined possible. The space had been converted into a sophisticated laboratory with surgical tables, restraining apparatus, and walls lined with specimens in glass jars. A large ledger open on the central desk contained detailed anatomical drawings of children identified only by initials, alongside meticulous notes about experimental procedures and results. "Subject CH demonstrates remarkable resistance to pain stimuli," read one entry, the initials matching Catherine Harden. "Maintained consciousness through procedure 7 for 14 minutes, exceeding previous record by 3 minutes. Specimen preservation scheduled for completion February 20th. The special studies that students had referenced, with growing fear, were revealed as systematic medical experimentation. Dr. Cole, operating with Ashford's full knowledge and support, had been using the children as research subjects for increasingly invasive procedures designed to test human physical and psychological limits. His scientific journals, discovered in a locked cabinet, detailed experiments in pain response, organ function, blood replacement, surgical techniques, and psychological manipulation. Each experiment was documented with clinical detachment, complete with detailed anatomical drawings and precise measurements. The younger subjects demonstrate superior tissue elasticity, Cole wrote, but reduced tolerance for blood loss. Subject WB expired unexpectedly during hepatic extraction, reducing the procedure's experimental value, replaced with subject TS with improved results. Most horrifying were the commercial aspects of the operation, outlined in correspondence between Ashford and medical colleges across the eastern United States. Letters detailed specimen acquisitions of specific ages, genders, and physical conditions, effectively selling children to medical researchers in an era when cadavers for anatomical study was scarce and valuable. The prices commanded were substantial, $50 to $100 per specimen, depending on condition and completeness. "We can provide the requested materials by March," Ashford wrote to a Philadelphia medical professor. "Our current supply includes excellent examples of both male and female specimens, aged 8 to 16, preserved using the improved methods we discussed. The advancing stages of developmental anatomy are represented across the complete age range." Behind a concealed door in the furthest corner of the basement, the delegation discovered the final evidence of Magnolia Ridge's true purpose. A hidden chamber had been excavated beneath the east wing, accessible only through a narrow passage. Inside lay 43 small graves, each marked only with initials corresponding to the students who had arrived so full of promise the previous autumn. Not all the graves contained complete remains. Some held only partial bodies, the parts Cole had deemed less valuable for medical study or specimens that had been damaged during his experiments. The condition of the remains revealed that many of the children had lived through weeks or months of progressive surgical procedures before finally succumbing. Most of the bodies appeared to have been disinterred recently, with empty graves and packing materials suggesting the remains had been prepared for transport shortly before the delegation's arrival. Letters in Ashford's office indicated a large shipment to medical colleges had departed just 3 days earlier, presumably the reason for the school's hasty abandonment. A single note found on Dr. Cole's desk revealed the twisted rationalization behind these atrocities. "The advancement of medical knowledge requires sacrifice. These children have contributed to science in ways their parents could never comprehend. Their privileged lives have been exchanged for progress that will benefit generations. History will vindicate our methods, if not our names." The horror that unfolded in that basement transcended even the worst fears of the parents who discovered it. Judge Harden, upon finding his daughter Catherine's partially dissected remains, suffered a collapse requiring medical attention. Thomas Blackwood, discovering his son had been among the last children processed for shipment, attempted suicide and had to be restrained by other delegation members. James Wilson, a former military officer known for his composure under pressure, was found catatonic.
staring at a jar containing what appeared to be his daughter's preserved brain tissue. By the time local authorities organised a comprehensive search, Ashford and Cole had vanished. Their trail led initially to Louisville, where they had boarded a steamboat bound for Cincinnati 3 days before the delegation's arrival. From there, reported sightings placed them in various cities along the eastern seaboard, but the descriptions became increasingly contradictory and unreliable. Despite warrants issued across 6 states and substantial rewards offered by the grieving families, neither man was ever apprehended. Some evidence suggested they may have fled to Europe, where medical research operated under different ethical constraints and questions about specimen sources were less rigorously pursued. Other reports indicated they may have established a similar operation elsewhere in America under different identities, though no conclusive connection was ever established. The investigation revealed that Cornelius Ashford and Ephraim Cole were likely pseudonyms. No records of their supposed education or previous employment could be verified, and the letters of recommendation they had presented to parents proved to be forgeries. Their true identities remained a mystery, though some evidence suggested connections to a Philadelphia anatomical society known for its aggressive pursuit of cadavers for medical study. The staff members who had participated in or enabled these atrocities faced varied fates. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, the replacement teacher who had assisted with the medical procedures, disappeared alongside Ashford and Cole. James Peterson, the Latin teacher who had documented student disappearances, provided crucial testimony but suffered from profound guilt over his failure to take more decisive action, eventually taking his own life in 1841. The local workers who had raised concerns, including Robert Davies, the groundskeeper, were vindicated but forever haunted by their peripheral involvement. The broader implications of the Magnolia Ridge atrocity emerged as investigators uncovered correspondence linking Ashford and Cole to medical institutions across the country. The letters revealed a network of suppliers providing human specimens to schools desperate for anatomical subjects during an era when legal sources were severely limited. Most disturbing was the suggestion that Magnolia Ridge was not unique. References to similar operations in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Missouri hinted at a widespread system exploiting children under the guise of education. Medical colleges implicated in purchasing specimens from Magnolia Ridge faced public outrage and legal scrutiny. Several institutions closed permanently, while others implemented strict regulations regarding cadaver acquisition. The case contributed significantly to the development of anatomical legislation in the United States, with most states passing laws by 1850 regulating how bodies could be obtained for medical study. Judge William Hardin never recovered from the loss of his daughter Catherine. He devoted his remaining years and considerable fortune to tracking rumours of similar operations across the frontier. His private papers, discovered after his death in 1857, contain maps and theories suggesting at least a dozen institutions operating under the same horrific model between 1830 and 1845. In each case, isolated locations, impressive credentials, and strict policies limiting family contact created perfect conditions for exploitation. I have traced connections between medical suppliers and educational institutions across 17 states, Hardin wrote in his final journal. The same patterns emerge repeatedly: remote schools established by well-spoken men with impossible to verify credentials, targeting wealthy families desperate to protect their children from disease. The system is diabolically effective precisely because it exploits parents' deepest fears and highest aspirations simultaneously. Hardin's investigation revealed that the medical college's desperate need for anatomical specimens had created a black market that operated throughout America. While most anatomical research relied on bodies acquired through grave robbing or the legal allocation of executed criminals and unclaimed paupers, these sources proved insufficient for expanding medical education. The Magnolia Ridge model
creating a false educational institution to attract children who could be systematically exploited represented the most organised and profitable approach to meeting this demand. For the families involved, the horror extended beyond the loss of their children. Parents who had paid substantial sums to provide their children with superior education had instead funded their torture and murder. This terrible irony compounded their grief with guilt that many never overcame. Several families sold their properties and relocated, unable to bear the whispered sympathies of neighbours or the constant reminders of their loss. The remains recovered from Magnolia Ridge were given proper burial in Lexington Cemetery, with a monument listing the names and ages of all 43 victims. School buildings were initially slated for demolition, but legal complications regarding ownership left them standing, abandoned, and increasingly decrepit as nature reclaimed the clearing. Local residents avoided the area, claiming strange sounds and lights emanated from the ruins on winter nights. In 1876, a fire of unknown origin destroyed most of the remaining structures, leaving only